start fighting with swords? How did that happen? And when in that story of
Oh my goodness.
Middle Earth?
Well, this preceded Middle Earth actually. I was 2 years old. I have a very distinct memory of seeing, I think it was Peter Pan, Disney's Peter Pan, and of course I was all for the pirates. I mean, I was ready to join them, you know. Peter's great, but you know, like obviously the pirates are way cooler. So I was pretty inspired by sword fighting from a very young age. Wow, I realized I'm just probably living out my childhood. Wow, oh, it's all so clear. So yeah, when I was 2 years old, I was very excited about swords, and pretty much from that age, anything to do with swords just got me really excited. During high school, the answer to that was fencing, and I had someone that paid for me to go do fencing lessons for a couple of years. Honestly, I was very bad at it. Modern fencing, sport of fencing, it's a very specific kind of sport. There's not really a lot to do with defense in it. You have to be very fast and sort of assertive to do well at fencing, and I was a lot more defensive. Ironically, that's what you're meant to be doing in a sword fight. So I was very bad at modern fencing, but I'm very good at real defencing, which is what the word fencing comes from, the art of defense. So yeah, when I was about 19, I mean, I think I was pretty grown up at that point compared to when some people start with sword fighting. But yeah, I discovered on the internet, I discovered medieval martial arts, and I think I was like looking at some really, really old page of some really passionate person, and yeah, I came across it as being a thing, as being this like thing that exists still, because there's all these documents and records of how people used to fight in medieval times. But up until the internet age, there wasn't really a lot of research being done into putting that into practice. It's like these kind of dusty tomes that are in academic bookshelves of these people doing funny like sword moves. And yeah, so I came across the revival of that, which is now it's known as historical European martial arts. That's the kind of encompassing term that we use these days, HEMA. And what that is the movement of scholars and martial artists. Oh, don't be! What's the bet that we just blew their minds up? So yeah, the people who are doing that kind of reconstructive work, and it's this big community internationally now of people doing all kinds of things. It's like poleaxe, knightly combat, dagger, wrestling, like all these different things, and people are all interested in it from like totally different backgrounds. You have people who are doing it for sport, you have people doing it for academic study, you have folks translating languages. Like it's just this enormous like thing, and for me, of course, I want to fight. So I got into it because I wanted to fight with swords, and that was really like the extent of my interest. But much like everything else I've been talking about, I wanted to get good at it. So I now I'm trying to interpret things for myself and looking at the source material, which means that I have like quite a lot of understanding now about medieval history, which I didn't have before. I just got into it and it was like, okay, well, you know, what was the context of this? You know, what are the people doing this for? Like, why are swords? Why are they illegal in certain medieval cities? You know, what did they do when they wanted to duel? Like all these kind of questions. What were they wearing? You know, were they riding? Were these people just nobles, or were they peasants? How did the peasants fight? You know, all these kind of questions. And that's the exciting thing about like medieval martial arts is there is no fixed answers. It's all just a research project that's actually just reconstructing how people fought. And we know that we know when it works that it's probably almost certainly right, because the whole premise of martial arts is its efficiency. But there's also like quirky things, like sometimes, you know, the goal of a fight wasn't actually about efficiency, it was about, I don't know, showmanship maybe, or like I mentioned, certain weapons would be restricted, or it was illegal to kill somebody, so you had to fight them in a certain way that wouldn't kill them but still mark them, and it changes the way the thing looks. So like understanding all that kind of environmental context, that's part of being a research martial artist. It's like, or you could just want to fight and just get the materials, get someone to teach you how to fight, get someone who can show you how to do it safely, and that's your thing, and that's totally cool. So like it's kind of space for all kinds of people. And for me, definitely I wanted to learn how to fight with a sword, because it's kind of like something I've been born with, almost like just this like deep resonance of what this thing is. So being able to fight now has totally changed my perspective on a lot of things. Unfortunately, it means that medieval fantasy isn't as immersive for me, sadly. And when I watch sword fights on TV, I just have to turn off my brain, because it's like, this is not real. Very few sword fights on TV are done in a way that's realistic, but that's okay. That's like.
What are the best examples in movies?
Ooh, good question.
Outside of The Princess Bride.
Outside The Princess Bride, yeah. Bob Anderson, the choreographer, he was amazing. I've seen some good stuff in the last few years. Sword fights. I'm so sorry, I never have a good answer to this, and I really should.
Can I say my favourite was Scaramouche?
Oh yeah?
Yeah, that's what I loved about it when I was, my version of Peter Pan.
Oh,
was
awesome.
watching that final fight scene in that movie.
I haven't seen it.
That's supposed to be a really.
I think I need to
realistic
see
one.
it.
It is a brilliant, and he's wearing the most amazing tights.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Check out the tights.
Okay.
But
Noted.
I've forgotten who the actor was again. What's his
Was it
name?
Errol Flynn?
Errol Flynn.
No,
Oh.
Scaramouche is not Errol Flynn.
Basil Rathbone?
I can Google it and tell you in like 2
You
seconds.
could
Yes.
do it. I can't, because it's been years since I've seen it, but
Yeah.
that was the reason I've always loved watching sword
Fantastic.
fighting. Yeah.
I've actually come across a website that has a whole lot of like historical movies for free,
Yeah.
and I think.
Yeah, my mum used to make me watch all the movies and go, oh, he's dead, she's dead. Oh, they died of cancer.
Oh,
Stuart
no.
Granger?
Stuart Granger, was it?
I don't know, that's just who comes up, like, as the lead guy.
Yeah, could be.
I don't know.
Like I said, Ben.
Is that it?
Yeah. I think his hair was a bit greyer, he was a bit older when he did the... But yeah, no, that was me. Absolutely love that one.
Cool. I'm embarrassed that I haven't seen it, but I will put that on my list.
Look it up.
Thank you. I didn't get into modern, early modern stuff. So this is considered early modern, the style. I didn't get into this until recently. I was more into like bigger swords or sword and shield, sword and buckler. But then I'm involved in a project that it requires me to learn small sword, and this is what this is, and I am so into it. I'm really surprised because it's just so deadly. Like it's like, actually that's not small sword, that's rapier. So this is rapier. You're gonna be fighting someone. You're keeping yourself very kind of back, like far back, and you're keeping your arm out all the time, which is very tiring. I shouldn't be doing that with a small sword. Small sword is more like sort of, aha, it's also my mother. I say, I shall stab you with my stabby thing. Stab. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I didn't really get into that until very recently. And the reason I really enjoy it now is because I also know how to fight outside of that. So it's more like in addition to my fight. And when I say fight, I mean like kind of being able to wrestle people or being able to like get 360 with them. And I was put off by this because it's so linear. But now I understand why it's so linear, is because you're trying to keep the stabby pointy thing out that way. So you don't really need to get around somebody as much, which you do in other forms, because if someone's wearing armor, you're not going to have an opening in front of you just waiting to be stabbed. Whereas with this, you're usually fencing somebody with clothing. You're not wearing armor when you're using a light weapon like this.
So we're talking more about Napoleonic stuff, or maybe
Yeah.
a bit less than that? Okay.
Yeah, it's like it's kind of like the Napoleon era would
Right.
be. Yeah, And I think soldiers and people like officers and everything, they would have something similar to this, but it would be a bit fatter, because this is not so practical for a battlefield. They would have like a slightly larger one, like a spadroon or something. Spadroon.
Saber.
Yeah, sabers, absolutely. Sabers were very popular. Sabers are very good because they usually had a cover for your hand, which if you're kind of surrounded by a lot of chaos, it's very useful to have something between your hand and yeah. Whereas this one doesn't need that, because when you're looking at your opponent, the only thing that they're seeing is that, right? So there's very little coverage, and it doesn't need to be any bigger. Can you all see that? It's like, if you were going to try and cut my hand, you wouldn't be able to reach it very easily, because there's that kind of long there's that long like distance between us. So sabers obviously can be used as a cutting weapon, whereas this is not a cutting weapon, this is a stabby stab.
Did you say that was like one you've come across, or was it custom build, or?
No, this was one that was so the project that I'm involved with, where I have to learn small sword, this is a training weapon for that.
Okay, that's right, you might have said that.
Yeah, that's okay. This is a little heavier than what I'll be using for the final project, which is actually a real one, like bought from an auction house, kind of real.
Okay.
Yeah, so very excited. Yeah. Unfortunately, it's in Amsterdam, so I won't be going there for a little while. That's okay. I'm very grateful to be here in Australia, in a very safe country where we're not wearing masks for social gathering, because there's no COVID right now here. Yeah. But yeah, every sword has a different purpose. Usually when you see a design, it's because it's used in a certain way. So something like this, as I mentioned, this is more from a distance. You're going to be fighting somebody for reasons of honor. Usually the people carrying it were fairly upper class. They could afford to be sort of well dressed and still wear a sword without having to worry about their personal safety most of the time. It was just considered something that they would have is a sword. It's sort of a gentlemanly thing to have. And in those days, unfortunately, gentlemen were the only ones doing this for the most part. Whereas a weapon, okay, so going sideways from this one weapon, this is the saber, saber design. So contemporary to this, the short sword, much fatter, and yes, this is a foam weapon, so it is a little exaggerated, but this is also fairly accurate for the fact that it would have been a cutty kind of thing, because you're using it in an environment that's sort of a little bit more chaotic, so you want to have something that's got a lot more heft to it, because you're not always going to set up for a perfect sort of stab or a perfect cut. You want to have kind of more of a yeah, exactly, more meaty weapon with some protection on your hand. And also in a recent internet vote by a whole lot of sword experts, they have determined that the saber is the ideal weapon for the zombie apocalypse. Just so you know. This weapon is much earlier, so this is an approximation of a medieval longsword, and this particular tool had to be a multi-purpose tool. So when you're fighting with this, it's not just a stabber, it's not just a cutter, you're also going to be using other parts of the weapon. So if I'm close to somebody, I can
Bash my head.
yeah, exactly. And I tell you, when it may not look like much, but when you've got this much metal coming into your eye socket, you're going to be very distracted. Yes, quite, exactly. And even without just it going into your eye, if you've got something like this, you can use it to sort of trip somebody up or like hit them in an opportune way, because there is a lot more sword to work with, yes.
Have you ever heard of the hand and a halfing style of fighting with swords?
I mean this?
No. So like I was watching with you ages ago. It's a technique of like actually using the blade as a spring, and then using the pommel, like you said, pommels earlier, with the with weird shapes, not efficient.
So using it like this?
But flat edge forward.
Yeah.
So this was like peasants picked up a blunt sword.
Okay.
And they would use there was like one book of it. There was one book, like a historical record they found, that went into this hand and a halving technique where they would use the spring, the flexibility in the steel.
I can
the
actually see
pommel
how
is
that
like
would
a
work.
mace.
Yeah, I totally know what you're talking
Yeah,
about. I hadn't heard of that, but I can imagine that working.
Yeah.
That might be because peasants were not allowed to use swords.
Yeah.
So if they're using that, I mean, I'm just problem solving on the fly here, but I can imagine that developing out of the context of a peasant not being able to do this,
Yeah.
but still wanting to use the thing
But they can pick it up by the
blade and then, yeah. So, I would be really interested to learn where that
They
came
were
from.
like talking about how it was used as a disabler for armor, because generally a knife point wouldn't slice through steel.
Absolutely.
But the pommel flicked with the sword, like this is like a full bastard sword or longer. The length of that flicked would like cripple the armor.
Yeah.
Like it wouldn't just cave the armor in, it would then cave in, make it jagged, and then that's a weapon in itself against the fighter.
True.
So it was like a 3-episode mini-series they did on this
Awesome.
technique of fighting. So
Oh, thanks so much for telling me. I'll look
Yeah,
into
that's
that. You bring up an excellent point. Most medieval armor was also quite lighter than we think, because of a few things. First of all, it had to be practical. So the lighter the thing, the more comfortable and long time you're going to wear it. And you had a whole industry of people pretty much refining the lightness of their armor for hundreds of years. So you ended up with some very, very, very beautifully made armor. The second thing was that when it got busted, there was a lot more people to repair it, whereas these days we don't have armourers the same way that we would have panel beaters. So they were able to make much more lightweight armour than us, and then if it got busted, they could usually afford, if they could afford to have the armour in the first place, they could afford to go get it repaired. And the armour was pretty much just a barrier between something killing them and not killing them. Surprisingly few armoured combatants died in battle. It's a much, much lower number than what we think. I don't entirely understand why that's the case. I think it's something to do with the honour system and the feudal system, of the fact that knights were sort of up there, yeah, and the bulk of the people doing the fighting were the people that didn't get recorded or cared about. So when knights wore armour to fight in battle, during the sort of the high Middle Ages, they were not expecting to be in a death situation. And if they were killed in battle, by somebody, or they were killed in a duel by somebody, it was usually because they'd been overcome and someone stabbed them in a very unpleasant place. So yeah, it's an interesting one because, like, I wouldn't say that this would stop. Like if something was coming towards me, like a charging horse or, a spear or something, this is definitely not going to stop that. But I think it was more that the situation that those armoured combatants were engaging with the battle, I think that they were already privileged, and that privilege protected them as much as the,
We've all seen Monty Python.
Go back in on what you did. Yeah. So when armoured combatants were fighting one-on-one, the idea was to overcome the person to the point that you could get close enough to stab in all those little joints, or lift up the visor and stab them in the face, kind of thing. Yeah, and so the pommel strike that you're talking about, I can see how that would work as a disabling thing. I wouldn't say that by itself it would be lethal, but you could certainly lock somebody up. I'd have to look into that more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I saw the same thing.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
It's like an SBS special
Yeah.
they did this one time, like years ago. But they discovered this one manuscript, and it was like all about this technique that the lower class used because they couldn't afford to keep their sword sharp or whatever it may be. So their blade wasn't as effective as the pommel of their weapon as an initial strike. Like if you get, it boiled down to if you got the combatant in the face or the helmet with the pommel, that crushed their skull. End of story.
True.
And there was no way they couldn't dodge it because of the springiness of the steel. So that created like a lightning fast, really heavy weight, like a mace, but even more effective.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. I'll have to look into it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, there's probably HEMA resources somewhere on it.
Excellent. Cool. How are we going for time
I
now?
think we're about there.
Excellent. I mean, I'm enjoying this as well, but I just
Probably hungry.
true. Yeah, you got a question? No?
No.
You're just sort of stretching and
Yeah, I'm just
looking thoughtful. Cool. Any other questions?
Some wild questions for you.
Yes, fire away.
So, being trained in swordsmanship, I assume that you might have an upper hand with other companions who are perhaps more swinging at you.
Swingy.
What a really great question. I don't know, because I have to use a lot of different strategies. Like I mentioned the spear thing before.
Mm-hmm.
My first reaction when I was demonstrating a spear to you guys was to go overhand, and then I had to correct myself because it's like, no, that's actually dangerous in the lapping situation.
Mm.
So I have to modify it to be something less dangerous
Right. Yeah.
in a crowd of 5,000 people. Yeah, I think just having the discipline of physical combat, I think that makes me a lot more teachable in a lab context.
Yeah.
Just having that kind of physical awareness and field experience, like being able to look at a field and understand how people are moving, definitely puts me in an advantage.
Do you see a sort of difference between sort of the more rookie, nervous combatants towards the more experienced
Yes,
sort of people who
Sure.
riddle up all the time?
for sure. The game that I've come from is different to what I've seen here, just because of the sheer scale of it. So the game that I've been playing, everyone has a job, and when they're fighting on the field, they're working together in big teams. Here, the games I've seen, people are fighting as individuals, and they'll sort of be loosely affiliated with groups, but they won't be functioning as a team as much. So it makes it a different kind of game. In a way that actually makes it more fun for me as a fighter, because then I can practice dueling. Whereas if I was at Bikuling, I definitely, I need to stick with my team, otherwise I'll get picked off. Yeah. I think just having body awareness and having weapons experience, like I can pick up a weapon without having used it and have a pretty good idea of how it moves in space, because I've worked with a lot of different stuff. Yeah. But I have to train myself when I do not to be dangerous.
Yeah.
And that's just like a little switch that I have to change in my head. The way that I do that is I just tell myself, okay, this is the target zone. Rather than the body or the face of being the target zone, I'll imagine the person with a different target zone as something that's been designed to be safe.
Sorry.
Trying to blow up the
So
words.
that little switch, does it ever go the
Yeah.
other way? And someone go
yes.
absolutely nuts?
Wait,
Or not, I mean, did they just get out of hand with the experience, like it just,
yes, absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, I had a very unfortunate experience when I was in a sparring situation where I had learned about the death of a friend immediately prior to going to meet a new club, and didn't realise that I wasn't okay. And I've spoken about this before in other, in martial arts contexts. I've spoken about this to martial arts communities. But yeah, I had no idea that I wasn't okay when I was fighting, and I reverted back to the most basic kind of fighting that I had learned when I first started fighting, which involves punching. And my sparring partner and I had not agreed on that as a thing. It wasn't cool that I did that, but I couldn't stop myself from, whenever we were close enough, just getting in there and being physical. And it totally rattled him. He didn't want that. He asked me 3 times to stop. I wasn't able to stop. Because when we were sparring, I thought I was under control. But yeah, when we got close enough, and it wasn't dangerous. We were both wearing padded gear. It's just that was not consented.
Yeah.
We had not talked about that. He had not consented to being struck in that way, and I was in the wrong. And it taught me a lot about not realizing when you're not okay, because I had completely compartmentalized so the person that had been killed very violently. It was a total accident. It was a car accident, and I had a very strong visual image of what had happened, but I also was on my way to go meet some people, and I was just like, put it in a box. Okay, we can deal with that later. And just had no idea that had affected me on such a deep level. I mean, of course it had. I just wasn't aware of that in the moment. So yes, it does. It does go the other way. I think anytime you learn something, you're always going to revert back to that as being the thing that you go back to. Like whatever it is you learn first in life in general, whatever your foundation is what you're always going to fall back to if you're in a compromised situation or position. So, yeah. But I would say I'm more safe as a fighter though because of the amount of sports experience I do, because what that does is it causes me to not target people in a lethal way when I'm sparring with them. So I've had incidents where I've struck a full strike and something's gone wrong and I've pulled at the last second because I've trained to pull. So I think that's actually really helped me as a sports fighter to be able to do that. Whereas if I just had a purely like self-defense background, which I've trained in self-defense, but if I was just purely self-defense, that little preservation thing might not be there for my opponent. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sam, thank you.
Hey,
I know
thanks
we
so
need to
much
get
for
you
having me
food.
tonight.
Round of applause. Thanks a lot. And thank you all for turning up too. It's when Sam got here, I said I don't know. There was one person here. Like we're definitely gonna have one, but it really helps to get that support to when we do things. It just gives me that reinforcement to say let's do more things. So we're doing 2 sessions of sword fighting tomorrow. That's all the spots are filled up. But if you're interested in coming to see more about HEMA, learn more, we'll be at the high school in the gym from 10:30 to 10 to 12:30 and 1:30 to 3:30 approximately. But we'd love to start a club in Yarram and start non-lethally hitting each other in most circumstances.
You know you want to.
And I think some of the stuff you were talking about too, this guy we both know
Yes.
has written from the sources.
Shout out to you, Guy Windsor.
Yeah. So Guy's done a lot of that interpretation of the original manuscript. So I know I've sold I think 4 or 5 of these in town already. So
That's
some
fabulous.
people have been studying already.
He's a veteran and he's also very good at making it easy for beginners.
Yeah.
And he's lovely.
Yeah, he is. So yeah, if you're interested tomorrow, we'll be at the gym at those times, and yeah, we'd like to keep doing more and bring Sam back again and bring other people and do cool stuff. Get
And
everyone in
crafting.
Yarram playing a game.
And I'll be happy to start
And
the
do
crafting
crafting.
thing.
Yep.
If people want like projects and stuff and want advice on projects and problem solving, how do I get this to do this kind of thing. I'd really love to help with that.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks again for all of you for coming, and
Thank you.
we'll see you at the next thing.
Thanks for having me. Goodbye, internet.